welcome to Wednesday night webinars. I'm Leah, I'm your host. I'm an integrative holistic health coach, and tonight I really wanted to talk about what I eat. How do I, as a health coach, eat every single day in order to keep myself healthy? Because obviously, I gotta keep myself healthy too. So, my journey really, in terms of eating what I eat, has been kind of like a roller coaster. I've probably tried like every diet known to man, or style of eating. I like to say style eating, not diet, because that's really what they are. They're just different ways of eating. When I was 22, when I first got out of college, and I noticed I had stretch marks and had 20 pounds extra weight, the first thing I did was obviously what everyone does is the calories approach, monitoring how much calories I'm supposed to be eating, right? Fitting myself in this little calorie box. I tried low fat for a long time because obviously that's what a lot of people thought was healthy, was limiting as much fat as possible. I also tried being a vegan for a while. I tried just vegetarianism, pescatarianism, uh, paleo, whole 30, elimination diets, keto, everything across the spectrum. I think I've tried. Maybe Weight Watchers at one point too. You know what I mean? Like literally like everything. And when I was thinking about it, I wasn't just trying to be healthy. My way of being healthy was in my brain, how can I lose this 20 pounds, right? That's what I equated health to. Obviously now I know it's a lot more than that, but that's what in my brain was equating to. So I was just trying to do everything I could to lose weight. So I was trying all these different diets and trying to figure out which one was the best one for me to actually work. And the reality is none of them worked, obviously, for me. Maybe they worked for a short time, but I realized in retrospect the reason they weren't working for me is because they were too structured, and I didn't like being structured in terms of my eating, right? That's why now I'm a big proponent of intuitive eating and figuring it out, and not fitting yourself in this like mold, because it's very hard for a lot of people to be structured in that way. And that's part of the reason why so many diets fail, because a lot of people don't like to fit themselves in that little box. And I was one of those people. I didn't like to be in this little box, because what happens when you get out of that little box, even if it's for like a meal or a day, you feel bad, right? You start to feel like guilty or defeated, right? And then there's a whole cycle there, right? We don't like that. And that's how I felt for a long time too. I was not immune to, oh man, I did not eat the way I was supposed to, and then I would feel defeated the next day, and then it's like, oh, it all goes to hell, right? No. So after all these years, and then eventually I started teaching nutrition and being a chemistry background, and I was a chemist for a long time, I started to really learn and think about just the science behind nutrition and what our body's doing, right? And then really all the light bulbs starting to go off. So, and then eventually I came to a point where I realized that it's not the box I need to fit myself in. It's eating real food, and that's why I'm always like, real food first, real food first. You have to eat real food. And the most nutritious food can you eat? So it's not just about eating real food, it's the nutrition piece. So many people forget about just the basics. Eating nutritious food, again, nutrient food, right? And that's what I think a lot of people are ultimately doing when they're trying all these different diets. What they're doing is eating they're going from one way of eating, which maybe is not the best because obviously it's not working, to all of a sudden eating something that's a lot more nutritious, right? So if you ever tried one of these diets or styles of eating, think about, well, what did you do differently compared to what you were eating before? Chances are you're just eating more real food and more nutritious food, and that's why you're actually getting results from it, right? So then it's like, well, what do all these diets have in common? It's the nutrition piece, right? So instead of trying to put yourself in this little box of I'll just say keto because that's like, the popular one right now. Putting yourself in this like little keto box, for example. Really, what you're doing is what is the most nutritious food that you can be eating, and that's really what you know really what I do now is just focus on nutrition first. I don't try to focus on this little box, right? um, for some people it is helpful, right? It adds structure to it, and I get that too. Actually, if you're one of those people who just is completely lost, you don't know what diet to try, I would actually encourage trying a bunch of different styles, but go into it knowing it's like an experiment, right? Don't think, oh my god, this is going to be the best one, I know this will work, and blah, blah, put put it on such a high pedestal. Look at it as kind of like an experiment, and what can you learn from it, right? Because when I went back to really look at all the different diets that I've tried, I realized that I actually learned a lot from them, and by doing all of them, it kind of molded how I eat today. So when I was a vegan, for example, I it was primarily plant-based, right? That's how vegans eat. So I learned a lot of different recipes that I still use to this day. I learned about the value of just plant-based eating, right? I don't even like the word vegan. I like plant-based eating, because it's really what you're doing. You're just eating more plant-based foods. Um, I learned the value in choosing high quality meat, right? By going vegetarian vegan, I learned the value of getting high quality eggs and dairy and milk, and all those things ultimately are more nutritious for you. So I learned a lot by going that route. And then fast forward to when I did keto, and I have to say, out of all the different diets I've tried, keto was the one I learned the most from. And I did the keto diet back when it wasn't even mainstream. This was maybe like, I was trying to think of when I did this. Maybe like 2015-ish. I don't remember. But, it was a while ago. And what drew me to that was the science behind it. There is a lot of valid science behind the keto diet. And it's not so much the keto diet, it's the need to eat more fat. So many people are still not eating enough fat, and that's why I preach that too so much. If you ever hear me talk or any of my posts or anything, you see how much I'm like, you have to add more fat to your diet, because fat in itself is extremely nutritious for you, and a lot of people just forget that or don't know. You have to add more fat to your diet than I think you know you need, right? So I learned a lot from that too. So now my way of eating is very heavily plant based, and I'm not just talking about veggies and fruits. I'm talking about nuts, seeds, sea vegetables, anything that comes from the ground or the ocean, right? That's when I'm talking about plant based. And it's actually, my diet's also very fat based. I'm not keto, I'm not low carb. I still eat my bread, my pasta, my rice. I still eat all those things. Um, Cakes, I still eat all that stuff. But I still incorporate a ton of fat. Like, we go through a ton of butter in this house, like a ton of butter. I actually had a client. She's so funny. When I told her how much butter I eat, she was like so relieved. Right? If you're watching, you know who you are, but you were like so relieved. It was so cute. But we go through a ton of butter in this house, like an absurd amount. I cook with it all the time, but I don't think about it anymore because I understand that your body needs fat, especially women. Women need a lot more fat than they think they do. One thing I do also is I minimize, not eliminate, because I'm human, is the amount of added sugar to my diet. So I've said three things, right? Very plant-based heavy, very fat-based heavy, good fats. I'm not talking about like processed fats. I'm talking about real whole food-based fats. Um, and less sugar, right? And there's a lot of science between all these things, right? And at the end of the day, it all is coming down to most nutrition for me. I'm really aiming for what are the most nutritious foods that I can be eating, right? There's a lot of nutrition against plant-based foods. That's where all of our micronutrients are coming from. If you don't know what a micronutrient is, it's basically all the thousands of molecules that are in plant-based foods that you have to have every day, right? It's not just your vitamins and minerals. There's only like a couple of those, but there's literally thousands of molecules that your body has to have on a day-to-day basis, and those things you're only getting from plant-based foods, right? And that's a whole separate talk. And the same thing with fat-based, fat things. I'm gonna say fat-based foods. um, but fat because there's a lot of nutrition and there's a lot of reasons why your body needs fat. It's not just an energy source, right? Your body needs it for a lot of stuff. And those are two main things I actually discuss pretty in depth in my nutrition course too. Um, just the reasoning and the chemistry, the science behind those things too. And of course, less added sugar because there is a lot of evidence that it's the sugar that's killing us, right? It's not the fat, it's not the other stuff, it's sugar, right? So I try to decrease my sugar too. I also feel better eating less sugar too. All right. Um, Another advice I would give too is, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but superfoods. I know I'm really big on superfoods. And I know it can be a buzzword for a lot of people, and a lot of people think it might just, be clickbait for you to like click on an article, like what are the top 10 superfoods of today, blah, blah, blah. And yes, that's true. Most nutrition articles are actually clickbait articles, to be fair. Um, that's why you gotta kind of read all of them with a grain of salt. But I do think there is some value in looking at those superfood lists, especially if you're coming from a place where you don't know what you're supposed to be eating and you don't know what these quote unquote nutritious foods are that I'm rambling about, right? So those lists are helpful because it gives you a starting place of what foods are nutritious that you should be adding into your diet. Because technically, a superfood, all that means is a super nutritious food, right? That's just what a superfood means. I actually like going over that. And in my class, I actually have lists of superfoods and I tell you why they are considered a superfood, right? I tell you all the benefits from them. So I actually think there's some value in looking at those lists because there's a lot of them. There's a million things that can be considered a superfood. It's just usually the lists are what's trendy at the moment, right? But they're helpful to look at them because then you can know what the nutritious foods are that you should be adding into your diet on a day-to-day basis, right? So it's a good starting point too. It's also fun to see what new stuff is that maybe you're not eating, and it's just fun to maybe try new stuff anyway, diversify a little bit, right? But that's basically it. I tried to keep today. Oh, I'm only like 15 minutes in. Um, so really, if you're curious into how my eating is, I'm not strict anymore about my eating. I learned a long time ago not to be strict. And I think for a lot of people that's helpful, right? Unless you have like an allergy or an intolerance to something specific, that's a separate issue. But if you don't, and you know that you don't, right? You don't feel like you should put yourself in a little box. Focus on what can I do to add more nutrition to my body. Not don't focus on how many carbs, fats, or proteins. That's what most people do. Most people are really hyper focused on, especially carbs, right? Most people are very hyper focused on how many carbs am I eating today? Am I eating too much or too little? Blah blah blah. You know, try something. Even go home tomorrow or whatever. Try just something for the next week. Switch your thinking. What can I do? What can I eat that is most nutritious for me today? How can I add those foods in? Okay, and focus on doing that on a day-to-day basis. That's all I do. I'll be honest. That's literally all I do. Is how can I add more nutrition into this meal? Right? That's all I'm thinking about on a day-to-day basis. And then if I want that cocktail later, or if I want that cookie or whatever, I don't even care because I know that for the most part, I'm adding a lot of nutrition to my diet, and that's ultimately what your body is asking for. All right, your body literally is just asking for nutrition. It's not asking for a finite amount of carbs or whatever. It doesn't care. It just wants nutrition. So if you give it that, it will do what you want it to do. Crazy, right? It will. So if you are doing what it's asking, which is just nutrition, it's going to do what you want it to do, like be healthy, lose weight, whatever other issue you're trying to fix, right? So I hope that's helpful. And that literally is what I do. I don't do anything special. I just focus on what is more nutritious for me. And again, that's just plant-based foods, fat-based foods, which I'm coining tonight. Fat-based foods and less sugar. That's it. That's all I do on a day-to-day basis. All right, how I eat. Um, but if you're interested in knowing why certain foods are more nutritious, the science behind it, I really encourage you to um, put your name on a wait list for my nutrition course. I'm going to do it in a couple months. I haven't picked out dates yet just because I'm still figuring out timing. But if your name's on the wait list, you'll be the first to know of what those dates are. And it also helps me get a head count of how many people to prepare for too. Okay, so definitely do that, especially if you want to know exactly why I ramble on and on about certain things and why I think so many things are important. That stuff is what I cover in depth in that class too. Okay. Also, if you're just needing help with figuring it out, you're just completely lost, you can send me a message too, and I'll be happy to talk to you individually as well. Because that's my job. I help people figure this stuff out. All right. So if you watch this in the playback, please feel free to ask me questions or comment that you watched. It'll be really helpful to know, and I'll answer whatever else you want to know. Okay? Well, have a good night, and I'll see you all next week, same time, same place. Thank you. Bye.